It was supposed to be a celebration of democracy, America's centennial year, 1876. Fireworks lit the skies, parades filled the streets, and the nation declared itself stronger than ever after the Civil War. But beneath the banners and patriotic songs, a darker reality was unfolding. The presidential election of 1876 spiraled into chaos, an election so disputed that armed militias drilled in the streets. Newspapers whispered of rebellion, and the country teetered on the edge of collapse. What few realize today is just how close America came to plunging into another civil war, barely a decade after the first had ended. The year was 1876, and the United States was still scarred from the Civil War. Reconstruction was fragile, Southern resentment was fierce, and racial violence haunted every corner of the South. Yet, the nation pushed forward into its centennial, determined to prove its endurance. Philadelphia hosted a grand exposition, showcasing inventions and progress while politicians promised stability. But the presidential race between Democrat Samuel J. Tilden and Republican Rutherford B. Hayes would shatter that illusion. Tilden, a reform-minded New Yorker, campaigned on ending corruption and bringing peace to the South. Hayes, a quiet but determined Ohio governor, vowed to defend Reconstruction and protect the rights of freedmen. When Election Day came, the results stunned the nation. Tilden won the popular vote and appeared to secure enough electoral votes for victory. But in Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina, the last three states still under federal Reconstruction, violence, intimidation, and fraud clouded the ballots. Each side claimed victory. For the first time in U.S. history, the presidency itself hung in doubt. And in a country still bleeding from war, uncertainty meant danger. Democrats in the South warned of resistance if Tilden were denied his rightful office. Republicans whispered of betrayal if Hayes was abandoned. The fate of the Republic balanced on a razor's edge. What no one realized in that tense winter was that America stood at the brink of an unthinkable possibility: a second Civil War. As the weeks dragged on, chaos deepened. In newspapers across the country, headlines screamed of fraud, intimidation, and stolen ballots. In the South, paramilitary groups like the Red Shirts and the White League, already known for suppressing black voters, marched openly, warning of bloodshed if Hayes won. In the North, Republican leaders swore they would never allow the White House to fall into Democratic hands through violence. State election boards in Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina sent two sets of results, one declaring Hayes the victor, another for Tilden. Both sides accused the other of treason. The electoral map was frozen in uncertainty. Without those disputed states, neither candidate could claim victory. Tension spilled into the streets. In Washington, D.C., rumors spread that militias were preparing to storm the Capitol. In South Carolina, rival governments were sworn in, one Democrat, one Republican, each claiming legitimacy. Soldiers patrolled the streets of New Orleans to keep rival factions apart. In the halls of Congress, anger boiled over. Democrats threatened to block the counting of electoral votes, warning that any attempt to hand the presidency to Hayes would be met with force. Republicans countered that surrendering to Tilden would betray the Union dead and abandon the newly freed slaves to terror. In January 1877, the nation's future was paralyzed. Families whispered of war, merchants feared economic collapse, and generals quietly prepared contingency plans. Even President Ulysses S. Grant, nearing the end of his term, feared bloodshed. He quietly reinforced federal troops in the capital, determined that the government would not fall to mob violence. As one newspaper grimly wrote, "The question is no longer who shall be president, it is whether we shall have a country." Then came the breaking point. By February 1877, the dispute had reached a fever pitch. Congress convened to count the electoral votes, but each contested state sent rival certificates. Who would decide? No clear law existed. The Constitution was silent on such chaos. The nation braced for the worst. Some Democrats spoke openly of secession. Again, crowds gathered outside state houses, waiting for word of rebellion. Armed men drilled in southern towns as if preparing for battle. In the North, Union veterans pledged they would march once more if the Republic was threatened. To avoid disaster, leaders agreed to create a special electoral commission. 15 men, 5 senators, 5 representatives, and 5 Supreme Court justices. The fate of the presidency would rest in their hands. But when the votes were cast, the result was not compromise. Along strict party lines, the commission awarded every disputed vote to Hayes. By a margin of 185 to 184, Rutherford B. Hayes became president. The decision enraged Democrats. They cried fraud, betrayal, even dictatorship. Tilden himself remained silent, but his supporters whispered that he had been robbed of the presidency. Across the South, there were calls for uprising. America held its breath. And yet, violence did not come. Because behind the closed doors of Washington, a deal had been struck. The Compromise of 1877. Hayes would be president, but in exchange, federal troops would be withdrawn from the South, effectively ending Reconstruction. It was a decision that saved the Union from a second Civil War, but at a terrible cost. The storm passed. On March 4, 1877, Rutherford B. Hayes took the oath of office under the watchful eyes of soldiers and a nervous public. The feared rebellion never came. Newspapers sighed in relief. The Republic had survived. But survival came at a price. By agreeing to withdraw federal troops, Hayes abandoned the promise of Reconstruction. Within months, Southern governments fell back under white Democratic control. For freedmen, it was the beginning of Jim Crow, a century of segregation, violence, and disenfranchisement. The Compromise of 1877 ended the threat of civil war, but it also ended America, as first real attempt at racial equality. The nation had chosen unity over justice, stability over freedom. Historians would later call it the stolen election, a moment when backroom deals and partisan loyalty outweighed the voices of millions. And yet, it was also the moment the United States proved that even on the edge of collapse, it could step back from the abyss. The election of 1876 remains one of the most disputed in history, a haunting reminder that democracy is fragile and that peace can come at the cost of justice. In the end, America did not fight a second civil war. But in many ways, the battles of 1876 never truly ended. They echo still, in questions of race, power, and the survival of democracy itself. History hides fragile moments when the nation stood on a knife's edge. If you want more untold stories of America's past, subscribe now and discover the secrets that shaped our world.